Lisa, I started the recording.
Okay, thank you. Okay, everyone, welcome again. Now, it is a little after 9 o'clock. I think we have a majority of attendees on the line, so we'll get started with our customary introductory remarks. I'm Lisa Chronister, the Assistant Planning Director, and thank everybody for joining the city's video conference stakeholder advisory team special meeting. Please note this meeting is being recorded. There are a few announcements to make regarding this virtual meeting. If the video conference is disconnected at any time during the meeting shall be stopped and reconvened once the audio and/or video connection is restored. If communications are unable to be restored within 30 minutes, items remaining for consideration will be continued to Friday, November 13th at 9 a.m. via video conference. The agenda and documents are located at okc.gov. Anyone wishing to speak under public comment, please call 405-297-2406 or email mark.misho@okc.gov. That's mark.mishoe@okc.gov. Speakers will be allowed 3 minutes to comment. Advisory team members will be allowed to ask questions or make comments at any time during the meeting. When you join the meeting, staff will mute your line, whether that's by phone or by Zoom. And we ask that all participants keep their lines on mute until they are recognized to speak. If you are joining by phone, to unmute your phone, press *6. Please remember that only one person can be heard at a time. If more than one person speaks, we will not hear you both. For anyone speaking today, including advisory team members, please identify yourself when you begin to speak. Staff will be doing additional roll calls as necessary to confirm attendance throughout the meeting. So with that, the meeting is called to order, and I'll ask Mark Michaud to do a roll call. And Mark, I'll start off by saying Asa is here. He can hear us, but he can't. We can't hear him, but he is here.
All right, thank you. Amy Epitone. Allison Barta Bailey. Jessica Black. Todd Booz. Gary Brooks. Andy Burnett. Ophelia Concio. Nathan Cow. Jorge Charneco. James Cooper. Scott Cravens.
Present.
Joel Dixon.
Here.
Jonathan Dodson. Clay Farah.
Here.
Chris Fleming.
Here.
That's Chris, yeah. Asa Highsmith is here. Julie Hornbeek. Andrew Wang.
Present.
AJ Kirkpatrick.
Here.
Mark Livingston.
Present.
David Lloyd. Ricardo Montoya.
Present.
Nikki Nice.
Present.
Jim Parrick. Emily Pomeroy.
Here.
Janice Powers.
Here.
Dima Ramadan. Mark Ruffin. Todd Stone. Tim Strange. Bryce Thompson. Marcus Uday. And Mark Zitzow. I'm showing 12 members present.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know a lot of people are still struggling with power and internet and property issues related to the ice storm. But like I explained by email, we did want to go ahead and have this meeting. It is being recorded, so those who couldn't make it will still have the benefit of the information because we are trying to keep on schedule as best we can. Can everybody see my screen and see it moving? Yes. Okay. Today we're going to touch again on the team roles and responsibilities, especially because there's a specific responsibility tied to this meeting. We're going to briefly review what we talked about at our last meeting. Then the consultant and I will introduce the draft of the proposed sign code and tell you what to look for as you move through it. I'll also provide you with instructions on how you can review it online and make comments. We'll also have a spot for public comment from some of our industry and resident members. Then we'll talk about where we're going from here. So we've talked all along that one of the primary responsibilities of the team is to examine the technical aspects of the code and specifically to review and comment on drafts. remarks. So the examining key elements and technical aspects, we dug pretty deep into a lot of that over the last 3 meetings. And now we're finally at the review and comment stage. So you may have noticed in various pieces of correspondence, sometimes I've been calling this meeting that we're on now SAT number 4, sometimes it's 4.5, because SAT number 3 was actually 2 meetings. You may remember we didn't get through all of the topics of the first one. Because at those meetings, there was a lot of very useful discussion about 5 specific topics: billboards, PUD applications, pole signs, measurement, EMDs, and we did a lot of Zoom polling to gauge everybody's feelings on the various topics. We talked about our proposed approach for billboards. Billboards needed to be defined as a physical thing, not a content thing. I think most people realize our sign code right now is based off the definitions of accessory signs and non-accessory signs, which are all content-based definitions. Talked about where billboards should be allowed and where they shouldn't, how far they should be spaced, how the spacing should be measured. And we also talked about strategies for allowing billboards to be located if other billboards in other areas were removed. If one or more billboards in another area was removed, that if we could create an incentive that would help us reach our goal of reducing billboards. We talked about a lot of the issues relative to PUDs and SPUDs, that one strategy might be to make sure that the requirements of the SPUD or PUD can't exceed what is already allowed in the base code. We talked about the rezoning issues relative to creating SPUDs just to allow billboards and how effective that was, it wasn't. We talked about the idea of a master sign plan that could be included with the PUD or SPUD that would help regulate the signs for those. We talked about prohibiting pole signs, at least in most locations other than freeways. We talked about maybe a more effective way to measure sign area in terms of allowing, measuring it by a multi-sided polygon instead of just a simple 4-sided rectangle. Talked about how to reduce height and to tie size and height to the capacity of the street that the sign is on, as well as the building size. Right now, for the most part, attached signs are regulated by street frontage and setback from the street, and not whether or not it's a busy street or a small or large building. So right now, a small building can have a relatively large sign. We talked about EMDs, that a lot of people felt that civic uses in residential districts such as schools and churches really benefited from EMD signage, and that it should be easier for them to obtain, as opposed to having to get a variance every time or to rezone every time. And then perhaps tightening EMD requirements for other commercial uses. That's what we talked about in the last 2 meetings. And so all of that input, and as well as all the discussion we had at various focus groups, all that has manifested in the new sign code. But I did want to back up. So after the last 2 SATs, and you remember we had lots of discussion, did all that polling. After that, Jeff, me, Marilyn, and Sarah touched base, I think, with most of the individual SAT members, because we wanted to make sure if somebody answered, for example, don't like it under a certain approach, we wanted to make sure we understood what their concerns were so that we could address it in some way. Because, you know, the polling was just a snapshot, but it didn't allow us to get too deep. So we spent a lot of time by email and on the phone talking to people, and that also informed the what you're about to see. So the new code, just the broadest description of it, is that right now the sign size and the number of signs and the types of signs you can have, they are all regulated in Chapter 3, Article 5. So we're proposing to replace that article entirely with a new article in Chapter 59. It would be Article 16 because that's the next available article. The new code will regulate signs by physical feature. We talked a lot about that we had to move to a content neutral approach, but that there were still lots of aspects of signs that we could regulate. It will use street typology and zoning to make the allowances for signs. It will combine all of the regulations for signs into one table by type. And we'll see examples of that here in a second. That's to make it easy to find for anyone reviewing the code, that they need a one table, and in that one table for attached signs, for freestanding signs, and that one table is everything they need to know about whether or not their sign is allowed, how big it can be, how tall it can be, how many they can have. And then a goal suggested in the phase 1 of the project was to make a highly graphic code that has illustrations to help describe exactly what types of signs and placement we're talking about. So then kind of the next level of detail that you need to know about is that many provisions have not changed, but have been relocated. And that was perhaps more difficult than it might sound, because the existing code is organized completely different. Like I said, a lot of it is regulated on accessory and non-accessory. But for the most part, we've kept the size and number thresholds the same, if not very similar, because one of our goals all along has been to minimize nonconformities. And I know several people in the group were concerned about that. The new code is organized around defining 5 different types of signs. You can see them here, and as well as all the different types of signs that are included in it. For example, attached signs are not just wall signs, but that includes banners, murals, window signs, group signs, incidental signs. There's been many conversations throughout this process about making sure we allow, have a reasonable allowance for temporary signs and realtor signs, and then of course, billboards. So in addition to establishing this new Article 16, when the ordinance is goes through the process, it will also go through and modify the language relative to accessory and non-accessory signs that is sprinkled throughout the code in very many sections. Design districts. So the Bricktown Design District was the only design district that had already been moved to, that was all contained in Chapter 3. So it has all been moved to this new article. The other design districts they're either overlays, or their base district, like downtown, relies on existing provisions for commercial or O1 or O2. So if there are specific design district standards for signs, those have not changed. And they will supersede anything that conflicts in Article 16. We also are addressing murals in this effort. Some of you may be aware that Office of Arts and Cultural Affairs has been working for years with various stakeholders and task forces trying to make the murals process easier and more predictable throughout the city, and we think we've done that. So the new code, when you see it, and it will live on the web, it's a web-based thing, just like MuniCode, if you're used to going to MuniCode to check your zoning requirements. So it will live online. Also, we'll be circulating after this meeting and in the future a PDF copy for anyone who finds that easier to read and mark up. And you can tell on the PDF copy, the organization of the article is very simple. It focuses on the 5 sign types, definitions, general requirements, trying to make everything very easy to locate and understand. So, Mark or Jeff, do you have anything to add at this point?
No, I'm good. I think, though, Lisa, you're going to cover it a little bit later. There's going to be a comment function.
Yes, I'm going to demonstrate that toward the end of the meeting.
Very good.
The one thing I did want to back up to was as we're going through, so I'm going to go through and show you exactly how we addressed exactly what points. And I know some of you have already noticed that some things have not been addressed in the way you thought they might have been since we left the last SAT meeting. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is Jeff and I have had subsequent meetings and conversations with the policy committee, which is the planning commission and city council members of the group, to confirm which items they were most supportive of and how they were supportive of it. So we've been asked to specifically include certain directions. So, but I do want to, I hope everybody believes me when I say, every bit of input that we have ever had throughout this process has informed some aspect of it. I mean, you might not see your specific comment literally translated, but every comment helps us, helps me at least, cross-reference and scrutinize what our intent was and if we're communicating it clearly. So
yeah, Lisa, let me just add on a little bit more. I mean, I think you said it well, but at the same time, if we still want to hear feedback. So if you have any kind of comment, like, why is this the way it is? Feel free to ask us questions, and Lisa will cover this a little bit later, but you can ask questions as you're reviewing it. You can make comments, say, oh, I think the sign dimension should be X, Y, or Z, just the technical details like that. Or, why are we doing it this way? How about this way? Because yes, like Lisa said, we incorporated everybody's comments to the extent that, we were able, but there may be a better way. And so, we're obviously open to better ways to do things. But we think we've captured what the policy committee and the stakeholder advisory team wanted, kind of the majority, what people felt should be in the code. There were a couple of exceptions where some policy committee members felt like, maybe there were 1 or 2 items that were kind of on borderline, but some people felt strongly enough about them that we we put them in, and those will, it'll all work itself out as we go through the process.
Yes, this is a point in time of the process. It's a significant point in time, but there is still quite a bit of process to go. So with that, I will start going through some specific changes I wanted to call to your attention. Overall, I hope you have seen by the meeting packet that went out that I've tried to create this presentation as a kind of a user's guide to the new code. So I've included excerpts from pages of the new code. I've highlighted or underlined exactly which part of it is addressing which approach. For example, we talked about defining billboards as a physical definition instead of non-accessory definition, and this is how that's being illustrated. Talked about allowing billboards only on freeways, except for specific scenic corridors, which is the next slide. Currently, we're proposing that those scenic corridors are the downtown scenic highway, which is already a designated scenic corridor, Lake Hefner Parkway, and then a stretch of I-35 between Northeast and Northeast 59.
And let me clarify on that one. Those were areas that were specifically asked for by members of the policy committee. So, we can, tweak those if, Councilwoman Nice, for example, you want to tweak the boundaries on that I-35 one, or, Lake Hefner Parkway, the boundaries are specified in the ordinance. That Lake Hefner Parkway, for example, was one that was a response to recent events going on over there, and then the downtown scenic highway one already exists. So we only proposed ones that were, for specific reasons or requests.
Right, and Jeff, we also, I don't remember if all of these criteria are in the existing code, but if other policymakers are considering suggesting other corridors to be added, have a list of criteria to evaluate those against, not just now, but in the future.
Yeah, these criteria are new. I think the old code just kind of said, we have scenic corridors or a corridor, and here it is. We wanted to make it clear kind of why, what makes it, or what could make a corridor scenic. If anybody wanted to add something down the road, 10 years from now, they can kind of look at this, and that's kind of the justification for some of these, for all of them.
Okay, so billboards, scenic corridors, we talked about increasing the spacing of them and measuring that spacing on both sides of the highway. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly to make sure we get through it. And if anybody wants me to back up later, I'm happy to. Credits for relocation. Mark, do you want to talk a little bit more in detail about this portion?
Yes, what this does is it allows somebody to relocate an existing billboard to a location that is closer to another billboard than our new allowance. Where, as Lisa mentioned, we're going from 1,200 to 1,500 feet, but you can relocate a billboard now to a new location within that 300-foot spacing if you'd like. But you've got to remove the billboard at your location and one other billboard.
This acts, and you all might recall, the way this is kind of a replacement for what we referred to previously as the cap and replace concept that we talked about. And so we got some great feedback about that. And what we think is that, and there were a lot of people that were for it and some people that were unconvinced or against it. And based on the feedback we got, we think this is a good proposal that you guys can consider, because it might help, at least we hope that it works well for both sides. it provides an incentive for a billboard company to be able to locate, to be able to have a little bit of extra leeway on the spacing, on the condition that they, remove a billboard somewhere else. So, it's a kind of a win-win. That's how we tried to structure it. We can, talk about this some more, but this is kind of our I guess, proposal for what we trying to make sure that we were listening to everybody and considering everybody's thoughts, and this is what we came up with.
Yes. So, okay, thank you, Jeff and Mark. So are there any, I labeled this discussion, I intended questions. Are there any questions about the information for billboards or scenic corridor or even the overall organization of the code? I'm trying to monitor the chat, but if anyone has any specific questions. please,
I do. I missed last meeting. So
sorry,
all this, I'm sorry, what?
Could you introduce yourself? I can't see everybody who's speaking.
I'm sorry. My name is Mark Livingston.
Okay.
So my question is, what you've gone through so far, is this including the residential community monument signs that announce the name of the community, or is that to be addressed later?
They are in subdivision entry signs. They are in the existing code. They're in the new code. And when toward the end of the presentation, when I go through it, remind me to show you exactly where they are.
Okay, so I mean, does this mean that that decision's already been made, or is that still open for some discussion?
Absolutely, it's open for discussion. In a previous meeting, Mark, I think that's what you were asking. We have not talked about those in great detail. Nobody brought those up as a specific concern. But yes, if you have recommendations for improvement, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, it's a good question, Mark. No decisions have been made. I mean, this is the first cut. So, we're looking for feedback. So yeah, we discussed a lot of things in our previous meetings, but that is a great example of one we didn't discuss. So, we have staff and our consultant have kind of filled in the gaps. So there's a lot of content in the ordinance that you'll want to dig into. Everybody will, and we would love to get your feedback. The decisions won't be made until the council votes on it. And so the council members, and staff, of course, want to see and hear your feedback on any and all details of this code.
So is now the time to bring up some of my concerns, or at a later date?
I think what we're asking for now is, and Lisa will describe, but now that the code is in draft form, we have a nice little website where you can go in there and just make your comments, and that way people can review it at their leisure. They can see your comments and respond to them. Staff can see your comments and respond to them. So people that weren't able to make it this morning can hear what you have to say as well. So that's kind of the plan for now. This morning we mostly just kind of wanted to kind of present it, see if there were any questions on how we're moving forward, and we're hopeful that we can capture your not that we want to, don't want to hear from you. You certainly can if you'd like to share your comments this morning, but we thought it would be more productive for the whole group so that everybody can see your comments in the document itself online.
Okay, so when I go to that, and I don't know how to yet, I'm sure I'll figure it out, but when I go there, will I be able to upload pictures or examples of what I'm talking about?
That's a good question. If you, Mark, I'm not sure if he can upload pictures, but you can certainly email staff. Do we have that ability, Mark, to upload pictures?
I'd have to go check with Encode. I think you can, but I don't want to say for sure. I know the editing function, I think allows you to, but I would have to go back and check with them.
Okay, well, and I think it would be nice to be able to, because some of the concerns I have, I'd like to be able to show examples of why I have those concerns.
Yeah. Good point.
For sure, you can just email them to me. I understand you want to make sure everybody can see them, but I can put them at a minimum, I can put them somewhere where everybody can see them.
Yeah, and what we can do, we have the chat, the Teams chat, so we'll send that out as well as a reminder for people how to access it. It's pretty easy. So you can put images there for everybody to see. The other thing you could do is put a link in your comments if you'd like to do that. People can just kind of go there and see what you've got in mind. So we'll have those options, but we'll also, like Mark said, check and see if we have the ability to put photos in the comments. I don't think we can, but we'll check.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Lisa, this is Bill Condon with Lamar. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Just a few quick questions regarding the protection corridors. I know the scenic river overlay has always been protected as far as from non-accessory signs in the past. So is that now excluded from on the protection side of it, or are those still stand?
That's the scenic, nothing about the scenic river overlay is changing.
Okay. Also, and this may be a question for Mark on the execution of relocations. So is there an ability based off of square footage that you could turn in smaller signs that may be located on the surface streets to, provided that it meets all the other requirements to get a permit located on the freeway?
Bill, I'm not sure I understand your question. Are you asking whether somebody can take a smaller billboard?
Yes.
That's current, and then relocate it to a new location and erect a larger billboard?
Yeah, so for example, if it's based off of square footage, we operate some smaller signs that I would refer to as the surface streets that are non-freeway. And if I removed a handful of those that I could turn in, would I be able to secure a interstate location, a 672 on a freeway spot? Does that make sense?
I think so.
Yeah,
The only restriction we have is the relocated billboard can't be in. You can't relocate to a scenic corridor.
Okay.
But you can relocate to any other eligible freeway. So that's one restriction. But I think you're asking an additional question, and I think what you're asking is are we just counting one billboard as one billboard, right? And so I can take a billboard that's currently much smaller
Right.
than my maximum allowance, and then go put in a much larger billboard, obviously up to the maximum allowance in a different location. And I don't think we allow for that in the new regulation.
Okay.
I think it's a square foot to square foot basis, but I'll need to go back. It's a good question. I'll go back and check the language just to make sure. I think that's what the city would want, but I'll double check just to make sure.
That's a great comment, Mr. Condon. I mean, we can, if it's still not clear, by the time this code gets released for public comment, you have the opportunity to drill into that or of course. And
Jeff, can I jump in real fast? I'm sorry.
Oh, sure.
I just
got it.
I just found the answer to my own question, and I knew it was in there. The replaced billboard has to meet the original sign area, but only up to 672 square feet. So if your original sign is 700 square feet, you can get 672 at the new location. If your original sign is 100 square feet, you can get 100 square feet at the new location. Sorry, Jeff.
Okay.
I just didn't want that to leave without jumping in on it.
Bill, we'll be, what we'd like to do for this, and I maybe jumping ahead of Lisa a little bit, but the stakeholder advisory team will have access to this online commenting function. But we can give you and anybody else who's interested in a PDF copy so that you can, you can have it and review it. And then when of course the stakeholder advisory team is done with it, we'll put it out for public review. And then at that point, anybody can, of course, comment on it. We hope for a lot of good in-depth kind of testing and questions and comments from the sign industry.
Very good. Thank you.
Hey, Lisa, Mark, this is Scott Cravens. Two small questions just to understand. So first thing on the separation, if you're using a replacement sign, you don't have to meet the separation requirement. Did I catch that correctly?
You have to meet the original separation requirement. So it's got to be at least 1,200 square feet, but you can now be within 1,500 square feet.
Right, but to Mr. Condon's point, if you pull a small sign off of a side street onto a billboard, you still got to meet those separation requirements on an eligible freeway.
The 1,200 square foot on an eligible freeway.
You
Correct.
can be closer, Scott. That's the incentive, is that you can be closer.
Right.
Okay,
Otherwise,
so
you'd have to
instead
be
of being 15, you can be 12.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
Right.
Second question. Does the new code, and if I'm getting ahead of you, forgive me, but this is just the billboard section, so I thought I'd ask it, have we dealt yet with C3 signs that are undeveloped that, you know what I'm asking, Lisa? So
That's our next, I think.
all right, I'll stop then.
Our very next slide. So with everyone's permission, I'm going to move forward and we can come back to billboards time permitting. So thank you for the segue.
Yeah.
Yes, and okay, so there's two things, Scott. The question you were asking was about there's discussion about prohibiting them in C3 and CHC, and to somehow deal with the requirement that the billboard be removed if and when the lot is ever developed. And we are this draft strikes that. This is what you were asking about, right?
Yeah, so it would just be a prohibition on the development of billboards in C3.
Correct.
That's not on a freeway.
Yeah, the reason for that, we had and Lisa, correct me if I misstate this, but we had a very late comment from our legal staff from the municipal counselor's office that they don't feel like we can actually, so the way it is now, they actually don't feel like that's something that's enforceable or that we can actually do. So what our original intent was just to say, well, you can't kind of subvert the process with a PUD or an SPUD, but then with this new information from legal, it basically means we just have to not allow it, because once it is in C3, apparently we can't ever get rid of it. So
this is Janice Powers. That is big news, and I think we're going to need to hear from legal about that. I'm going to want to really dig into that with them, because every billboard that's on C3 property, undeveloped C3 property right now, was permitted with the understanding that it would be removed when the property was developed. So if that's something that we're just going to, throw up our hands and quit on, I'm going to really need to understand why.
Yeah, that is a big deal. You're right. And like I said, that's late coming information. So we didn't want to, postpone this because of that, but it is something that we are going to be having conversations with legal about, because you're right, Janice, that's been around for a long time, and that's always been the understanding. And so that's kind of a big deal if it changes.
It's not just an understanding, that was the condition for the permit. So
you're changing their conditional use after they've been permitted to do it.
Exactly. So. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that addresses that, though, is now we are requiring, and I'm sorry, Lisa, I know I'm jumping ahead too. We're now requiring all PUDs and SPUDs to comply with the underlying regulations, which would now not allow billboards in C3. You can't PUD or spud your way out of that.
But we're
So
talking about
maybe that-
going forward, property that's already zone C3 being allowed to keep their billboards even after they're developed. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, it definitely is. And that's why we need to have those conversations.
Are there non-policy members that are on the call today that have thoughts or comments about that from the development community that we have not heard from? I would personally love to hear from somebody who's not on those committees as to their opinion about that change and how that might impact them specifically or indirectly even.
Yeah, I think there are several industry members on. If someone is joining by iPhone who's a industry member, I can't tell who it is.
It doesn't impact me, but I'm trying to understand it. So when these spuds were done previously with an understanding that those billboards would be removed, was that documented somewhere in the approval process? Because if that was documented that it was temporarily, it shouldn't be an issue.
Well, what's been happening, and a recent example is up on Memorial and just west of Portland a little bit, about a mile west of Portland. But there's an empty parcel and it's zone C3, and the code says now you can put a billboard there, but once it's developed, the billboard has to go away. That's what the current code says. In some cases, folks have come through later and kind of got around that by just allowing it and say, well, we want to develop this property, but we want to get rid of that code stipulation and still keep our billboard. So they've been in, I don't know how many cases. I know of that one recently, but it's happened a time or two or more where they've been allowed to keep the billboard as part of their HUD or SPUD and also develop a strip mall or something. So, but again, so that's what the code currently says. And when legal came back just a couple days ago and said, well, we don't actually think that we can enforce that based on state law. That was kind of like Janice said, a big deal. And so really what it means is, well, if we can't require them to remove it, then we can't allow them to put it there in the first place. That seems most consistent with the intent of the current sign code and our current policies. So hopefully that.
Jeff, this is,
Oh yeah,
can you hear me?
Susan's here.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
We're not saying that those that are existing NPUDs and SPUDs right now, where they negotiated that to come down, those can still be enforced. What we were saying was that in the general code requirements going forward, we don't think that that can be a condition placed upon that use. Because under the statute, it just allows you to terminate non-conforming signs for specific reasons. And that's if it's abandoned for more than 2 years, or you can't, like, of course, enlarge it or anything like that. But so we're not saying,
Susan,
yes.
This Janice Powers. So you're not saying that the currently existing billboards on C3 property that got their permits with the stipulation that once the property was developed, C3, once it was developed, that they had to take those signs down. You're not saying that that conditional permit is somehow not enforceable.
I don't think so at this point. I will go verify that for sure, but I think that would be non-conforming. I mean, what's existing now would be non-conforming, however they got their permit and under those conditions. I think what we're saying is going forward.
But
Okay.
So Susan, it would be non-conforming.
I mean, if they've already got a permit is what Janice is saying. They've already got a permit.
Yeah, what I'm talking about is if we have a billboard on a vacant piece of C3 property right now, that's legal, and it will be legal unless we change this. So if we say it's no longer permitted, if we do this strike through the way it's shown here, then it would be non-conforming. So I guess, yeah, we need
whether
to,
it's non-conforming, this is a critical point. Whether it's non-conforming and therefore allowed to remain even though the property is developed, or whether they have to comply with the condition of their permit, which is that if the property is developed, the sign comes down. Which one of those two things is where we're going to be as to currently existing billboards is a big issue. We need to have an answer to this.
We
So
will get, yeah, we'll get.
I'm
to
not
that.
saying we need to have it right this second, but we've got to have it.
yeah, we'll get some clarity and specifically about that exact scenario and what this means for it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so yes, thank you, everybody. So Mark just mentioned, and I'll just re-mention quickly about, so one approach was to specify that PUDs or SPUD applications can't exceed the district regulations, the existing district regulations. Talked about billboards, and we'll provide more information to everybody on that. And then we talked about the master sign. Oh, I don't know, Mark, did we talk much about the master sign plan?
Well, we haven't yet today.
Well, please. No.
But yeah, the master sign plan is going to, it's a new requirement that we're putting into the code to encourage people to basically coordinate their signs with the character of the rest of the development in terms of materials and display and everything else. It's a requirement for developments over 5 acres in PUDs, SPUDs, but there's also an incentive that goes along with it. So there's an increase in sign area and sign height you get by going through that process. So, you know, it's both a new requirement for PUDs, SPUDs, and larger developments, and but it also gives us some flexibility and gives the sign designers some flexibility as well.
And Mark, I had a question from somebody yesterday about, they might not know what all their signage needs are when they come in with their PUD. But I think the master sign plan doesn't have to be submitted at PUD application. It can be submitted at building permit time. Have we talked?
It would have to be submitted with your PUD application.
This is Mark Zidzow. Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So I'll reserve most of my comments for the PDF, but on this particular issue, I think it's going to cause a significant number of problems. And I guess I would request that the sign package requirement be moved to the specific plan stage rather than the PUD stage. And part of that is, if the new requirement is that we have to meet the sign code, then I don't see why we have to provide sign details at the PUD stage if we're meeting the code.
Well, you don't. If you're meeting the code, you do not. But if you want to exceed the code, you would have to.
Okay.
There's not much change from the current process as far as that goes when you're doing a PUD.
So to be clear, it's only if you're proposing more signage than what the code allows that it's a requirement. Is that correct?
Yes.
If you elect to. Right, it's a
So-
requirement for 5 acres or PUD.
Yes, sir.
So can that still be done at the specific plan stage where you request more and get that extra increase for providing those details? I think at the PUD stage, for a bulk of the PUDs that are done, don't have tenants in mind. And I think the 9,000 Broadway project is a great example of that, where we rezoned that 6-7 years ago, and they just came back now with their final sign package because they figured out who the tenants were, and one took up a massive amount of property, and so that reduced the number of tenants. So
Okay.
I guess I would be asking for more flexibility at the specific plan stage without needing all the details at the PUD stage.
Okay, that's very worthy of consideration. We'll certainly take a look at that.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I mean, the intent was to have a tool through these master sign plans that would allow, flexibility and allow people to do some things that they're currently doing with the PUD and SPUD process, but allow that flexibility without having to do a PUD or a SPUD. So yeah, I think, yeah, that's a good comment. We'll look at that.
Any other questions about this section?
Hey, Lisa, it's Bill Condon with Lamar.
Yeah.
Leading up to this and the enactment of the moratorium regarding PUDs and SPUDs for non-accessory signs or billboards. So leading up to that, there were opportunities of putting an application in for the sole purpose of allowing for a new sign. So kind of walking through that process, has anything changed, or how does it reflect now with this, with what you guys are enacting now? So will there be an ability to go in and for the sole purpose of getting a billboard, which otherwise would not allow it, can you use the PUD and SPUD process to circumvent?
Oh.
No, and there's some specific language in there. I don't know if we have it on our slides here, but yeah, that was one of the things that we talked about with the stakeholder advisory team, that we wanted to tighten up so that it could not be something that you would use to circumvent. And that's why, again, why we have the master sign plan language in there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So pole signs, I've already heard from several people about the pole signs concerns, but this draft proposes prohibiting them except for freeways. Freeways are defined in the sign code as divided arterial highway with access, with limited access via only on and off ramps. So interstate highways, Lake Hefner Parkway, but not Northwest Expressway, for example. So pole signs would be prohibited in a significant area of the city. And it is, you might, when you look at the code language, you might be looking for a sentence that says pole signs are prohibited. You won't find that. You'll find language that says any sign not specifically permitted. And in the list of signs that are permitted, you will not find pole signs. So I wanted to point that out. And then the freeway language.
Okay, I'm sorry, this is Janice first. Why did we choose to do it that way? Why can't we just say pole signs are not permitted? I don't understand why we would want to leave any ambiguity or the possibility for confusion.
Mark, do you want to address just, this has come up on several things, like to what extent can you say something is not allowed? There's lots of things not allowed. And we've tried to be careful of not trying to identify everything that's not allowed. But Mark, do you have another way to explain?
No, I think that's a good explanation, and we could certainly add something more direct, I think, to the list of prohibited signs, and just add pole signs to that.
Okay. Then there are currently there are there's a definition for freestanding signs, and freestanding signs are ground or monument signs. Freestanding signs are not, a pole sign is not an allowed freestanding sign. So I just wanted to point that out as you're going through the code. Any other questions about pole sign?
Lisa, this is Mark Zitzo again. I lost connection, so if you address this, I apologize. Is freeway defined somewhere? Is that based on like street classification in the comp plan, or?
No, it's not based on street classification in the comp plan. It's defined in the sign code definition.
It's basically interstate,
Lake Hefner Parkway.
Kepner Parkway, I-40, just anything that's limited access. If it's got an exit and an on-ramp, it's a freeway.
So what will be the process for either a planning commissioner, city councilor, or neighborhood association to seek the scenic corridor designation on a stretch of freeway?
There's no specific process outlined in the code. If somebody wanted to do that, it would just be, something they could approach their city council person about, or planning commissioner.
Right. It'd be an amendment to chapter 59 to add it into the designation.
So would it effectively be done like a rezoning process?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And there are some criteria that were added. And I think we may have covered that earlier, didn't we, Lisa?
Yeah.
About what, oh, okay, comes later, about what qualifies as a scenic designation. So I think maybe the closest analog is a historic district designation.
It's on slide 18, Mark Zitzel.
Thank you.
Sorry, it's on slide, slide 18. Okay, so measurement and allocation, and Mark White, I'll ask you to go through this in a little more detail than I can. So earlier I mentioned that for all sign types, and the example you see is for ground signs, but there's another table for freestanding signs, and another table for EMD signs for all the sign types. So in this one table, you define what you're allowed. You read across on the top for your zoning district, and then you read across on the left for your street type designation. These street type designations are from Plan OKC. And based on those two parameters, you can find, the first question everybody has is my sign allowed? Is it permitted? Yes, no. One question is it allowed? The second is usually, does it require a permit? And from then on, we get into the detail of, well, how big can it be? How tall can it be? Well, this is ground sign, so it does have an area and a height. Mark White, do you want to explain anything else further about the way these tables are organized?
Certainly. I mean, we've carried forward one facet of the existing regulations in which your sign size is tied to your frontage, basically. So, the more frontage you have, the more sign area you get, up to a maximum. Before that maximum, we've tied that to street type. And the reason why is, there's several reasons why. I mean, one is streets are form givers. I mean, they shape the character of a community. And secondly, the more intense your street classification is. So the closer you are to an arterial, for example, the faster people are driving. So it makes sense to allow larger signs on those streets, because people need, just scientifically, as you're going faster, if your signs are smaller, they're harder to read. People, make aberrant driving maneuvers to slow down and see the signs and that sort of thing. And so it's common practice and it makes common sense to allow larger signs on those streets. And so, and by the same token, if you're a residential area, if you're on a main street or some other mixed use designation, a more walkable setting, for example, where signs are naturally going to be smaller, and we want them to be smaller because that's the character of that area, the sign sizes reduce. And so they scale up based on that. And they also scale up all the way to 700 square feet in your more intense zoning district designations, just like you do today. So we were sort of walking that balance between, doing the right thing with Plan OKC and with what we're told by the committee, but not making a radical change in what people would get today with their sign package. So that in a nutshell explains the numbers as you go through the table.
Okay, so we talked about size and type, and the same thing about that height is tied to street type. We would, as you're going through the code, so our Mark White did a good job of trying to transpose our existing parameters into this new system, but we would love all the feedback we can get on if you think we got it right on the size and height thresholds.
Lisa.
Yeah.
Sorry, Scott Cravens again. Can you go back to the previous slide? I just want to make sure I'm understanding this table correctly. So if you have a site that has greater than 100 square feet of frontage and you are zone C3, so that would be what most retail shopping centers and restaurants and things of that nature would be zoned, and you affront May Avenue, you would be allowed a maximum of 150 square feet of signage, regardless of the amount above 100 linear feet of frontage that you have?
Correct.
So if I've got, to use Mark's example, if I've got Mark Zitzow's example, if I've got, let's assume that development was on, May Avenue again, just to stick with the street typology, and I've got 1,200 feet of frontage there. So I've got a major development. The code's going to limit me to 100 square foot of signage, 150 square feet of signage.
Scott, this is just this is just your freestanding sign.
I understand. Yeah, so it's freestanding signage for the development. Is that correct?
Yes, so it's freestanding. So look at the third row from the top, the number. So you get one automatically, and then if you have a very large frontage, you get another one
for every 200 feet.
For every 200 feet. So if you're if you're on a corner, you get one per frontage. So
got it. So if I've got 1,000 feet of frontage, I can have 5 signs.
Yeah, I don't have the footnote showing up here. I don't think we cap it, but I will check. But I just want to point out it does recognize that there may be some very large sites that need more than one sign.
And I think, those very large sites, they could have some flexibility with of course, the master sign plan. So.
Can I, this is Janice Powers. I want to just be clear about this. So you're not talking about, you're actually talking about the number of signs, not square footage. I mean, the idea that you would have, 5 signs as opposed to maybe just 1 or 2 larger signs. Is there something about that we ought to tweak a little bit? Should it be a square footage consideration rather than an actual physical number of actual physical signs, or at least the option to do some trade-off there? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, exactly what we want to hear. If people think there should be more smaller, or fewer larger, or more larger. Yes, that's exactly.
Well, that's not practical. I mean, in a lot of instances, that's just simply not practical. I really hope some of my other, some of the other folks that are involved in development here will speak up. But when you start out with a project that's got 1,500 feet of frontage and you start to carve it up into commercial development, you have no idea in a lot of instances what's going to be there. So, you need to have something objective that you can use to plan to. So when you take a site out to Chick-fil-A to show them what you're proposing, Chick-fil-A can see by right what they're entitled to. This idea that you're going to have a constant series of trade-offs is not a good idea. We should have an objective baseline that these people can see that they're entitled to have. So I like the idea. I'm not saying that this is perfect, but I like the idea that it is clear about what you could have instead of what we have now, which is this sort of constant debate about, what is and isn't too much signage, and should we have less signs but more square footage or vice versa. Like that's all silly.
You don't think that the developer might like to have that flexibility?
I think they should have the flexibility, but I think they should be able to see by right what they have. So I don't like the idea that we have this that we're going to create a code that's going to allow for these trade-offs in the future. Like, just show people what they're going to be entitled to by right. If 200 feet of frontage is the number to get an extra sign, let them see they have an extra sign. Because in the instance where you have a 9,000 Broadway type project where the whole project changes based on who comes, then the developer could always come back and say, hey, I got 5 signs, I don't need them. What I really need to get this deal done is 2 signs that are X number of footage, and it's above this code requirement.
And my point is, I don't think they should have to come back. I think we ought to find a way where we can build it into the system so that they can make those decisions.
I agree with you in the sense that I want to provide them certainty that's reasonable. But what I don't want to do, what I was afraid that your comment was, Janice, was that we were going to go down the path where we try to be more restrictive here so that we could be less restrictive in City Hall, at Planning Commission and City Council.
No, not at all. I just want to, as I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, so it's 1 plus 1, one sign plus another sign for every 200 square feet. Wouldn't perhaps the developer like to know, I get 1 plus, I get, because I don't really do this for a living, I get X square feet, that'd be my first sign, I'm entitled to that by right, plus, and X square feet per 200 square feet of footage, so that they can decide whether they want one larger sign because this is only going to be 1 thing, or it's only going to be 2 things, as opposed to it's going to be 5 things. I think it would be nice if the developer had that flexibility and they don't have to come back to us to make that decision.
Yeah. I would love to hear from some of the people in the development community. I don't want to be the one monopolizing that side of the conversation, but I would love to hear the feedback on how, this sort of an arrangement would affect them and how it would alter from their experience, their projects.
Yeah, and Scott, I'll say what you're describing is exactly what we need from you. And I know Clay has similar concerns. Yeah, like Janice, I don't do big retail developments anywhere in the city. I don't. So we need the experts on the call to tell us, should all of these thresholds be increased? I know some people, you can't have too much signage. When we did we took the new code and we did a few tests against signs across the city and a variety. We did them in C3, we did them in I2, we did them across districts, across street types. And in most cases, applicants were not using up their sign allowance. So like they would be allowed 150 square feet, but they were only installing a 40 square foot sign. So we were pretty quickly able to realize, hey, the existing code obviously had a generous allowance. But if it is clear to you guys that these numbers are too restrictive, please let us know.
I was not talking, Janice, I was not talking about that at all. It's not a question of how much square footage we're talking about here. My point was simply that it might be nice to be able to give the developer the option to decide how to spend a maximum amount of square footage, whether to spend it by doing it on 2 signs or 5 signs.
Yeah, and
Right.
yeah, Janice, Joel has a comment that, you know, his question is, can your concerns be addressed in a master sign plan? And I think, depending, you know, I think we need to look at the master sign plan and see if that is indeed the case, because it was, you know, it was designed to provide some flexibility for just that.
The other thing about the master sign plan that this is a question in my own mind, and if we're not doing a PUD or an SPUD, we're not going to have the option to look at it, you know, later by a specific plan. I don't have any problem with Mark Zitza's point that, you know, you don't always know at the front end, you know, what kind of sign package you need, but you could come in later. And we do that. We allow people to show us their sign configuration at specific plan stage, but we only have a specific plan stage when we're talking about a PUD or SPUD. Do we even do it on SPUDs? So if we're going to allow people to make those decisions later, there'll have to be some mechanism by which that later occurs.
I would echo, this is Mark, I would echo Janice's comment. I think if the original intent, or one of the original intents of the overall code update was to reduce the number of PUDs and SPUDs, I think by only allowing the flexibility to occur through a PUD and master sign package submittal, you're just going to continue with the people requiring a PUD to get that little bit of extra signage. I'd love to see that taken care of at a staff level, personally.
You don't need to get a PUD. Just want to make sure that I'm Mark, that I'm clear on this, and that we're all clear. I don't think you need to get a PUD to do a master sign plan.
So is that
That's correct.
Yeah,
that was my understanding as well. This is Joel Dixon.
Correct.
Yes.
The third criteria, or under the applicability statement for master sign plans, is people who elect to do a master sign plan. So applicants can voluntarily come in and do that. I think in the chat, there's a good point about the dialogue between Scott and Janice, that, you know, we could maybe allow for something through that could be done both administratively and with clear numbers up front, like Scott was saying, so that, you know, it doesn't become some sort of discretionary, uncertain discretionary workflow for somebody. It's something they know they're entitled to just by looking at the ordinance. I think that's perfectly doable. And if I'm not wrong, I think Janice and Scott were actually saying the same thing. So
yeah, I figured that out too.
Interesting. Yeah.
No, I figured that out too. Yeah.
Okay.
I think what she's saying is right. I mean, if you could do that objectively, where someone can see through the code, you can have, you know, 5 signs that are no more than 100 square feet, or you can have 2 signs that are 250 square feet or whatever. I mean, that gives people the certainty and it gives them the flexibility. I think that is great, because I'm all for trying to do everything we can to keep people from having to come through our process twice, which is 100 days per trip. So
sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, Scott.
So this is Mark again. How is this, and I guess we'll maybe see the full code, but how is that permitted without it being a variance to the code? So if the code says, here's how much sign you have, there's going to be some sort of footnote that says, apply for this, and Planning Commission can waive that requirement for X% variation, or is this going to end up at Board of Adjustment?
No, it's not a variance, because the criteria are baked into the ordinance. I mean, the additional height and the additional area you get are part of the ordinance standards. So there's nothing to vary. It's because once you submit the master sign plan, you're entitled to that extra area and height. That's a standard. There's nothing to vary.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Okay, so you'll see when you see the draft, you'll see these types of tables throughout. And again, I'll ask. I think For those working on current and recent and future projects, those would be very helpful to test projects you're planning right now, to test them against these tables and see if they are or not accommodating what you need. Okay, so, EMDs, the approach was to make sure that that schools and churches that are located in residentially zoned areas could be allowed EMD signage. So in this table, you'll see information about operating hours, about the sign, how much of the sign can be an EMD, about its distance from from homes. I think all of these thresholds are larger than what they are in the existing code. What else is in here? Then there is in the fine print and in the other provisions of this sections, it talks about the illumination levels. So look for that. Yeah, so that's what I was saying when we talked about tightening EMD criteria for commercial uses. That was specifically related to how close these signs are to residential properties.
And that would apply also to the civic uses thing. I mean, the limitations and the tightening with respect to distance relative to residential definitely would apply also to the civic uses.
Yes.
Okay.
Any questions about EMDs?
Sorry, Lisa, this is AJ Kirkpatrick. Can you go back to allow for civic uses in residential districts? Can you explain a little bit more about what is currently permitted versus what this now allows? I didn't catch that.
Right now, I believe somebody, Mark or Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they're not allowed, and applicants have had to get variances and rezone to get an EMD. And now they wouldn't have to, because they would be allowed by right with certain operating hours and brightness and distant from residences.
Yeah, I'll let somebody else weigh in on the specifics of the existing code. But we have made it explicit, at least in this table, that we do allow EMDs for non-residential uses that are allowed in the residential districts, which are typically civic type uses like schools and those sorts of things.
Yeah, and
So,
AJ,
and that's part of the standards now. It's not something that would require a variance or some other discretionary process.
AJ, I had alluded in the chat that we've run some, and in my speaking about running some tests of the new code against past applications. We actually couldn't find an recent, in the last 5 years, an EMD application that wasn't part of the PUD. So we actually could not test, against what was allowed and what was allowed in the existing code and what was allowed now, because we couldn't even find an example.
So I got into a debate a little bit, and this may be going further down the rabbit hole than we need to, but with the content-based restrictions and the concern with content-based restrictions, if a church gets an EMD by right in a residential district, are they allowed to put anything they want as messages on that?
Yes.
Anything that's not, anybody's allowed to put whatever they want as long as it doesn't break state law regarding, obscenity and those things, those types of things.
So a church could be selling that ad space.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
People can put up political messages, commercial messages, whatever it is that they want. And
This is Clay Farha. I've just got a real quick comment on that. My problem with EMDs is not so much what they're showing is the flashing. And I think we got to be careful there. I mean, like I said before in an earlier meeting, Walgreens won't even go into Edmond because they're so restrictive on the EMD signs. And I've never understood the thing with the neighborhoods. I mean, as long as they're not flashing like Las Vegas and they just give basic information like Walgreens. I mean, I have no deal with Walgreens, don't get me wrong, but it's just, my point is that as long as just giving basic information, I don't see why neighborhoods would even have a concern about it. And I'll go on mute here.
Yeah, thanks, Clay.
Our definitions of so level 1, level 2, and level 3 EMD, that's defined now in the code, and we're not changing those definitions. So level 1, that's the Walgreens sign, the black with the red text that says whatever, Diet Coke on sale.
Yeah.
So that's level 1, and you can see, so level 1 and level 2, are consistently allowed. But level 3 have the more animated graphics and flashing, quickly changing graphics, and those would not be allowed in residential or in some of the commercial.
To Clay's point, it's Janice Powers again. You used the comment, as long as they have basic information. We're getting out of the information business. We're not going to regulate what they put on them. They literally can sell the ad space. The issue with respect to the neighborhoods, as you put it, I think has all to do with how bright they are, how intrusive they are. That's all.
Yeah, and that's one reason we put hours, Janice, to help, keep the neighborhood, quiet.
Because
Really quiet.
To Janice's point, those LEDs nowadays, those LED signs can get really bright, and that's why we've also got a foot candle limit in there for the brightness on those signs, because that's something that members of this group are concerned about in residential areas, because it can really, it can really, blast into people's windows and be pretty obnoxious. Just the sheer brightness of those things.
Well, then, I mean, and I agree with that. And I mean, that makes all the sense in the world. I misunderstood. And I guess my only comment is maybe just dial it back, period. I mean, why do you need that flashing, obnoxious sign? I mean, again, it's not Las Vegas. And if you just keep it simple, like, what Walgreens does, and I just use them as an example, maybe just I mean, I don't like disallowing things, but on this, I'd be okay with it, that you disallow flashing signs, that they only have a certain brightness, but let the retailer or the church advertise what they need to advertise, but no flashing, and just maybe just kind of dial it back, but give them that flexibility up to that point.
Thanks, Clay.
Lisa, this is Mark Zitzo. I have one question on the Bricktown overlay.
Yeah, I was getting ready to address that a second ago. So let me see if I know what your question is, and if I can answer it. It's not presented in detail here, but it is in the draft you'll see. So some of you, Mark included, may remember several years ago, there were various controversial sign applications in Bricktown. And in response to that, the committee passed a ordinance update that made EMDs allowable only for certain uses. Spectator sports was one of them. So the ballpark could have one, and small parking lot EMDs were allowed. And there was one other one I can't remember. But because the EMDs were allowed for certain uses, that was getting into content. So we have, and you can see it here on this slide, if you look on the right-hand side, BC, that's Bricktown Core, instead of allowing EMDs for certain use types, they're now allowed for a certain site sizes. For example, sites with at least 10 acres or 50 parking spaces. So it's not, what you're doing on that site that allows you to have the EMDs. It's the size. So an objective measure, there aren't too many 10-acre sites in Bricktown, but that's how we've addressed that. Mark, is that what you were going to ask?
Well, I think that was one of the questions, because you're right. I'd be curious to know how many 10-acre sites there are in Bricktown. So I guess I was surprised to see how much more signage for EMD was being permitted than the current code.
I think that's too big, and I did make a comment to our consultant, but I was going to double check it. I think that's listed as too large compared to what's allowed now.
Yeah, well, so it kind of sounds like really then EMD is just going to be permitted on parking lots or parking structures, because like thinking through the development sites that are left in Bricktown, I'm not sure there's a 10-acre site. But my question is about the setback from residential use. Just to be, I guess, it says adjacent to residential property, which I think is different than residential use, because if it's Bricktown core, technically that's a mixed use zone. There's not an R4 zoning to be adjacent to. So I think, is the intent there setback from an actual residential use?
I will double check that. There's, yeah, Mark there, Mark, why?
Yes. It's not a residential zone, it's a residential property, residential use. So
but there's provisions for both. One is for residentially zoned and one is for residential use.
The concern being there of someone saying, I own a vacant site, and arguing, I don't want the CMD because my property is technically zoned Bricktown, which allows for residential, which makes me a residentially zoned property. And if that was the case, you just kind of get into that argument. So.
Oh, okay, yes, we will look at that.
I'm curious, this is AJ Kirkpatrick again, related to Bricktown. This is reminding me of the Oklahoman sign across from the coal core and the impact on hotel visitors. I don't know if that's been considered at all, but just been a week in a hotel in Bricktown, so it's just top of mind.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And Lisa, do I understand the footnote? This is Mark. Do I understand the footnote correctly that residentially zoned does not include live work units or dwelling in mixed use? So if there's an apartment building with retail on the bottom and you're doing a level 3, that's not considered a residential zoned building. So you could put up level 3 EMD across the street.
That's what I am reading.
Okay.
But wouldn't that fall under a residential use? And then doesn't that, this is Joel Dixon, by the way, doesn't the residential use restriction take effect?
Well, this is a footnote. It's the very last footnote on the table.
It's an exclusion from that general rule. We allow it in Bricktown.
Just for the design district.
This is something, this is something that's going to require a little bit of extra thought here. We have lots of property around the city that is sort of by default, because when it's annexed, that's what it is, zoned R1. Some of it very well may develop R1, some of it may not. And so the distinction between a residential use, which, would exclude lots and lots of R1 property because it's not developed yet, and limiting it to or granting it sort of blanket, granting it to every R1 zone property, a lot of which pretty clearly will not be developed R1. That's going to require a little bit of finesse and thinking through. And on the other hand, yeah, why is a live work unit or a multi-use that permits residential entitled to sort of less protection? The big signs, the full-on signs, they are really intrusive. And so a hotel, I wouldn't have even thought about that. Of course, we think about these kind of signs in Bricktown and the core downtown, like the Oklahoman sign, and their proximity to hotels would be really problematic, I would think.
Okay, yes, thanks. Great comments. We will dig into that a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to move on because I want to make sure and get to this. I know people have to leave, and let me see. So let me stop the share. Let me juggle things around real quick. Okay, can everyone see the code webpage? It's got a picture of the Overholser Dam on it. And let me get or find my inbox, which should have a login with it somewhere. It is. Okay. So I will send you a link, and when you go to that link, you will see this page, and view our. So this is the working public site. It's not live to everybody without a password, but so when I click it, actually other people can see it without the password, but you'll see here's that table of contents on the left. That was part of my slide presentation. So I've just landed on attached signs. And if I want to comment, I will share with you the password if this works. Okay. So the password, and again, I'll share it. It's Myriad Gardens. So it's going to remember me. Well, here, let me go. Before I make a comment, so attached sign. So, I can just read through the code in whatever level of detail I want to view it at. I lost my sticky note for the subdivision signs. Mark, where is that? That's
Subdivision signs is under freestanding signs. It's 59-16107. And that's it's the last subsection of that, so it's subsection C.
Yeah, so here, subdivision entry sign 16107.3, and here's Mark Livingston. Here's the chart. I can't immediately tell you how this compares to what's allowed now, but if I wanted to comment on it, like if I thought sign area, if I thought this 40 square feet, if I thought that was too small or too large or not flexible enough, I could come over here to comments and I'll put in my name. Your computer should auto recognize and auto fill your name and email. If it doesn't the first time, it will after you enter it the next time. And I can just put, please check this and submit it. So it's pretty, I'm not allowed to comments because I'm staff, but.
Lisa, this is Mark. It's a quick question. is the sign area on this particular one based on the lettering or a logo, or is it based on, we've had this issue, and I think I've made this comment several times. We've run into this issue in the median.
The whole thing or just the text?
Yes, because if you put it on a fence, it's not counted. But if you put it in a structure in the median, the 8th floor views the entire structure that it's attached to the sign. And a lot of times it's just a landscaping feature, but it's caused a lot of variances.
Sure. To be honest, I'm not sure. I need to talk through with the 8th floor about their interpretation. I don't think we define how it's measured otherwise.
That's one of the issues. This is Mark Livingston. That's one of the issues I do have, because it's so restrictive if you don't have it on a wall for design purposes. And that'll be one of my comments, along with some photos from other cities and what they allow at subdivision entrances to make them really attractive and nice. So you said that the passcode is Myriad Gardens. Is that with a capital M and a capital G?
Yes, and I will send it to everybody. I'm gonna see if I can. I'm gonna Mark sits down. I'm gonna see if it'll let me be you for a second.
Can I have final approval on any comment you make?
Sure. Oh wait, yeah. I'll make it clear that it's
Yeah, Mark and Mark, those are great comments, and we had heard those before, that there are interpretation issues, and so we want to make sure that it's clear in the code so that things like that aren't left up to staff interpretations, because I know that those have been problems in the past. So if it's unclear, please let us know, because we'd really like to fix those in the code rather than have to rely on interpretations that are not ideal.
I would happily send a recent variance application if you need it, that has examples of where the lettering is meeting the sign code, but it's the interpretation of the structure that's caused the issue.
Yeah, that would be great.
Well, I've even had one where we wanted to do a statue, like a bear or something, in a median, but with 15 square feet, they were counting the statue or any type of artwork as the sign, even though it had no name on it. And therefore, I mean, the ability to design decent entries in Oklahoma City right now is very difficult.
I also have this, Janice Paris. I also can remember a couple of different instances where that issue of artwork as signage has been a problem, or has been an issue. And, it is very sort of different. We had the whole big discussion about whether, the company's logo is artwork. And it's like, well, I think most people would say, no, the company's logo is signage, but the definition of artwork, a statue of a bear, most people would look at that and say, well, yeah, that's artwork. But that particular point, I think, also is something maybe we could give a little bit more thought. Very hard, I think, to make kind of a distinction. It's just hard to do these one size fits all things.
Yes. Yeah, we've addressed some of what you're talking about, Janice, in the murals section, which is 16108.8. Right now, murals are currently in the existing code. Murals are a conditional use, but they would be changed to a permitted use. And the criteria for approval will be listed in this section instead of the conditional use section. All murals will require a sign permit, but no murals will go to Arts Commission. And murals that are in design districts will go to their respective design district. So it's removing the Arts Commission, which may sound counterintuitive to some of you, but we got a lot of feedback about all of the steps that were required. And since the Arts Commission cannot comment on the content. The reasons for murals to go to Arts Commission were fewer and fewer because we've included, we've transferred over a lot of the existing murals criteria over to this section and made them more objective so that the sign permit reviewer can confirm them. You will notice there is still some content related language in this section relative to obscenities and indecencies. And we felt that was important. Well, one of these is already in the code, and we felt it was important to include as a community standard.
That's a good example of something that we still are working with legal on. So, as we said before, not everything in here is final. We had the other issue that Susan Randall commented about earlier. This is another one that we've been working and will be working with them on to make sure that it is all perfectly legal.
Lisa, this is Mark. It's that who would administer whether or not something is considered, it's small, immoral content, obscene? Is that Mark Magdalena reviewing a sign permit, or?
It is whoever is issuing the sign permit.
And so if somebody, it's really just kind of a, if staff feels like, oh, this might violate community standards, they can send it to the director and it can be appealed. So, I think we have the Board of Adjustment in there as the actual deciding body. So if it gets flagged by staff as, hey, this could potentially be, harmful to minors because it has cartoon characters shooting up heroin or something, then they could flag that and it would go through that process.
Jeff, this is Susan Randall. That is one of those two provisions we're working at. So we have actually changed some of that language in there, but it's defined by state statute on what is obscene.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, number 8 is state statute, right? But number 7 is language OKC has had in its code. Correct.
Yeah, we've been working with Rita on that. So if she hasn't been connecting with you on that yet, we will get together with you.
This is AJ Kirkpatrick again. Specific to the murals, I probably want to think about this some more. But while I was at DOKC or downtown OKC, we tried to do some thunder-based art that we met some resistance on because it was ultimately viewed by staff as being advertisement for the Thunder. I'm curious if that has been brought back onto the table as anything to re-examine as part of this. If you go down that path, if someone were to go to Plaza Walls and repaint the Campbell soup can of Andy Warhol, then that would also be, I guess, an advertisement for Campbell soup.
Yeah, there would be no restrictions. There are restrictions on text, on the amount of text. But if you paint a Campbell soup can and the Campbell's is less than 10%, then you're good.
Okay.
So Lisa, would this have resolved the issue that Sonic faced on Penn and 23rd?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if you have a donut shop, you can paint donuts all over it. If you have a taco shop, burger shop, you can paint tacos and burgers all over it. You're just limited on how much you can say, how big your salsa sign can be.
Well, first impression is this is a very positive change.
I hope so. And we have scrutinized this section a lot internally, but I welcome everybody to do similar because the intent was to make everybody loves murals. The intent was to make it easier, but also have something that identifies them as legally established, like a permit with the owner's signature, something to distinguish them from graffiti. So we had to get, a little bureaucratic specific on the language, but the intent was, to make interesting murals, easy to put up. So, and this would be, so this section would apply to all design districts. There are murals and design districts would still need a CA because it would need to be evaluated if they're being painted on non-painted surfaces, or if they're obscuring architectural or historic features. But one last thing before people leave, Mark, why do you know we're trying to set this up where everybody will be able to see everybody else's comments. Mark, do you know where I go to see that?
I think it shows up in the edits of the maintenance module.
But how
But
does,
again, I can double check.
but how does the, oh, I mean, but I thought we were trying to set it up to where the committee members could see each other's comments.
I think they may be able to, but again, I'll have to check with Encode on that specific question. I did confirm though by email while we were talking that you cannot, they don't have a way for you to upload pictures right now. So committee members could post that to Teams or get it to us some other way if they have something that's like a photo image off topic from what you just asked. But no, I would have to ask them specifically.
So I'll send the password and the link immediately, and then give me a little bit to send everybody further instructions and to send out a PDF. And we are asking for a pretty quick turnaround of next week. As I'm flipping through here, I'm trying to just illustrate just how much more graphic this code is, and how the tables are visually organized. So I hope everyone thinks it's an improvement, but please weigh in on that. So we're asking for everyone's comments by the end of next week. I know that's a short turnaround. If you can't, for whatever reason, do that, we'll have the public comment period in December, and the website will also be open to receive those comments.
Yeah, and again, apologies for the tight timeline. You know, we have a moratorium in place, and we're trying to meet that. And I think we all on this meeting know how long the adoption process takes. So we're trying to accommodate that schedule, and we lost a week due to the ice storm. So yeah, if you can get us your comments in a week, we'd sure appreciate it. You know, if you can't, you know, we understand. We'll still, of course, take the comments. Yeah, much appreciate your understanding and your efforts getting us comments as quick as you can, and we'll be responding. You know, we'll be tracking, and so as you make comments, if you ask questions, we'll answer them. You know, in the app itself.
Yeah, and I would suggest, because everybody's time is limited, that some of you may want to just go through the code and look for a specific topic that you want to weigh in on. Like some people have voiced that they're particularly concerned about EMDs or subdivision signs. You know, that would be time well spent just to focus on a few specific items. Some people may want to take a bigger picture look at all the graphics to see if they are communicating effectively. It would be helpful, you know, if anybody did just a flip through to check the user friendliness. And, you know, I mentioned earlier, if you have a pending application or a recent application or an upcoming application, take that application and see if you can quickly and easily find, you know, what you would be allowed to do under the new code. I think that's one of the best ways that this code can be tested.
This is Mark Sinsa. Can I ask one quick question? On data.okc, the street center line map, is that what we should be using to identify street classification?
You should be well, the code, this draft directs you to Plan OKC website.
Yeah, and so Mark, you can access that either on planokc.org or on data.okc.gov. We've got the Plan OKC mapping tools on either site. I would use data.okc.gov if you're going to get into the details, because we just amended the comp plan, so we're in the process of updating. That's more likely to be accurate. We're in that awkward phase where, you know, we adopted the amendments and we're in the process of updating our websites.
So if you use that, does Plan OKC, and I'm looking at it right now and it's kind of hard to tell. For May Avenue, for example, is Plan OKC changing the street typology based on what's adjacent to it? So if 3/4 of a mile have residential, is it still considered a major arterial, or is it being bumped down to a neighborhood street because of what uses are adjacent?
Well, all that was factored in. So when the street type that you see is the street type. So if it says major arterial, that's what it is. And those considerations that you just talked about, those have been baked into what it's designated as. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay, thank you again, everybody, for attending and participating. Again, ask me any questions at any time. And if you need any more information, I can provide it to you in the next week. Jeff, do you have any other final parting words?
Just thank you, everybody. This has been a great discussion. Appreciate the questions and the insights. We look forward to hearing more of that or seeing more of it in your comments. Optimistic that we'll get a really, really good code that will be good for our community.
Janice Powers here. I gotta say, great job, you guys. This is a lot of information to wrangle and a lot of details to try to line up. I think you guys are doing a great job.
Thank you, Janice.
Thank you. Everyone, have a good weekend.
Thank you.
And